All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. It looks like we have a handful of passionate attendees, and we have, of course, 3 passionate panelists in the spaces that we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Investing in Island Resilience. And I hope that you all take this as an invitation to take a good hard look at why investing in things like vertical agriculture and renewables is actually not just good for social outcomes, but is good for your return on investment as well. Let me open this by saying it has been a while that I have wanted to get these 3 organizations and these incredibly interesting folks in the same room. As a professional, I have done various types of social media and outreach as an extension of my professional life. Not a few years ago, I realized that I was spending a lot of time working with a lot of very interesting people, everything from thought leaders to business leaders to policymakers in some very interesting spaces. People that had really good messages to get out there. So I put that into a podcast that I kind of do for fun called Latin American Intersections at LATAM Podcast. So that's my shameless plug for today. Outside of that, I'm actually a Latin American Caribbean business strategy and social impact consultant. So I generally advise on how companies can reduce risk by taking a good look at social impact, government relations, and their engagement with communities, and why investing in communities and folks such as small farmers, for instance, is actually worth your time and your dime. So in that light, I've been able to bring together, thankfully, Yara Nagi from Agritecture, James Ellsmoor of Island Innovation and Solar Head of State, and I've been able to get Rodrick Miller of Invest Puerto Rico, an organization which is out here communicating to the world and across the United States all of the incentives and investments that you can make here on the island. So I brought all these people together to have a pretty broad discussion on how all of these pieces fit, right? A lot of what we're going to talk about, especially in regards to the resilience of vertical agriculture and renewables, is pretty applicable across the Caribbean. Rodrick Miller is going to help me tie it into why Puerto Rico is a great place to look at getting into these spaces and what's been done so far to incentivize some of that. So without further ado, and without me going off on any more tangents, I'm going to let each presenter and panelist introduce themselves and the organization they're with real quick, and then we'll move right into some 10-minute presentations from each of them about their specific space. So starting with Rodrick, can you tell us about you and your organization?
Really glad to be here. My name is Rod Miller. I'm president of Invest Puerto Rico, and we are singularly focused on bringing new jobs and investment to the island. So it's our job to figure out how to create opportunities and really tell the story for foreign direct investment to come into the island of Puerto Rico. We provide a myriad of services to potential investors, ranging from site selection support to how to navigate incentives, to even how to figure out how to solve your workforce needs. So we work closely with companies so that they have a turnkey experience and really can take advantage of all of the great benefits that Puerto Rico has to offer from an investment perspective. Thank you.
Excellent. Yara?
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Yara Nagi. I am the Operations Director at Agritecture. So at Agritecture, we work to help entrepreneurs or organizations or investors who are interested in starting their own urban farming concept or are interested in learning more about different urban farming projects. So a lot of the work that we do mostly revolves around feasibility studies for these farms, but we definitely do a lot more work like due diligence and just general market research as well.
Excellent. And James?
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is James Ellsmoor. I'm the Director of Island Innovation. We are an international network connecting very different islands to share information. Clearly, Puerto Rico and Greenland and Fiji are all very, very different places, but the idea is that many islands have similar issues, similar challenges, and similar opportunities. And so we use our network to share that information, particularly on the themes of sustainability, and which of course covers most of the most angles, including of course the economy. So we'll be sharing a bit about what we're.
Awesome. All right. Let me just quickly speak on a couple of things here before we go into everybody's presentation. There's an exciting piece of information. The federal government has actually finally pushed a aid and hurricane relief package to Puerto Rico, something in the realm of $13 billion. A huge chunk of which is being is going to be leveraged by the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, presumably to bolster small farmers and presumably agro entrepreneurs. One of the things that I'm hopeful of is that as we move forward with the information that we present here and in future conferences, that we can find ways that possibly this aid can be bolstered with private investment in those sectors. One of the things that I'd like to quickly touch on before we move into the presentations is a field in which I don't know if you'd call it a field, but one of the things that I work in a lot is multi-sector collaborations. And one of the things that you can find as an investor or a community leader or policymaker is that there's a lot of different ways that you can collaborate between each other and within different sectors for the best possible outcomes, as well as to improve and amplify the effects of the investments and government funds, et cetera, that are being placed into these communities, right? You can share risk, you can amplify the effect of these investments and these aid packages. So just something to think about is, are we thinking about how we can leverage academic sectors, government sectors, community sectors? There's so many different ways to bring all of these different branches together in order to improve both social outcomes and ROI. And before anybody starts laughing at I know some investors kind of chuckle a little bit when you bring up impact investing. But the fact is impact investing itself has good principles for creating generally sustainable assets over the long term with respectable returns. And a lot of what was once considered just the impact investing space is being integrated into a variety of other types of investing in order to reduce risk. So besides social outcomes, you're always going to be able to reduce your risk and create more sustainability of your investments. And that's one of the reasons that we're looking at these spaces today. So without further ado, let's go right into about 10 minutes each, presenting from Rodrick, then Yara, then James, about their expertise in these fields.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully that works without any challenge. And if not, I can just talk without sharing the screen. So hopefully that'll work. Let's see here. It says disable participant screen sharing, but it's not critical that I have it, but you might want to try and see if there's something you can do for the next speakers.
Yeah, give me a quick second.
So while he's doing that, I'll start talking. I mean, I've already shared a little bit about Invest Puerto Rico. We are an organization with a very simple mission. Our mission is to really promote Puerto Rico as a competitive investment jurisdiction to attract new businesses and capital investment to the island. In a nutshell, it's about jobs and investment. How do we create more jobs on the island? How do we secure more investment? We aim to be transformational and results-oriented in doing this work. We were created against the backdrop of hurricanes Maria and Irma. We actually were set up by law slightly before hurricanes Maria and Irma hit, and actually started operations about a year, just a little over a year ago, a year and a half ago. And you know, it was interesting following hurricanes Maria and Irma. the entire Puerto Rico was really struggling with questions of power, questions of food security. Someone says my voice is very garbled. Is it garbled for everyone, or is that someone else's? It's not garbled. Okay, great. So the island was struggling with issues of food security. The island was struggling really critically with questions of energy and how were these things going to be provided to the citizens and the businesses of the island. That backdrop really, is an important context. Invest Puerto Rico does not have as targeted sectors agricultural technology or energy due to our design. That said, when Michael reached out and said, Rod, would you come and talk about the opportunities in Puerto Rico? This was something that we absolutely had to share and discuss, because it's vital to the economic sustainability of the island. I'm going to try again to share my screen, and hopefully we'll have success this time. So hopefully you all see my screen here. And I mean, the real, when we talk about what Puerto Rico is, I think this is very important context. It's a U.S. territory, but it's part of the United States, a population of over 3 million U.S. citizens, bilingual in English and Spanish, a bunch of natural assets, six climates here in the island. And we're, of course, strategically located in the Caribbean. One of the things many folks don't know is that Puerto Rico's roughly half of our economy is manufacturing. But I think there are a few things here that are concerning. One of the most important in terms of it as it relates to our economy is the percentage that's agriculture. That's only 0.8% of our economy. And one would think that for an island, that number would be higher, given kind of our natural flora and fauna capabilities. The other is utilities at 2.1% of the economy. So there's a real need to address issues of food security in a thoughtful way. And I think there are tremendous opportunities as it relates to providing not only service here on the island, but also exporting. And from the utility side, there is an entire investment. The Luma deal was announced maybe about a month ago in terms of modernizing the PREPA's grid. Also, since the storms, we've had a myriad of microgrid projects and others to try and figure out how to shore up the energy system. We're talking in excess of $10 billion of federal investment that's slated to come to the island through HUD, through FEMA, and other governmental agencies over the next 10 years. So it's really creating an environment that says, not only is the question of sustainability kind of at the core of the island's, the question of sustainability is at the core of the island's long-term survival from a food perspective, as well as from an energy perspective. And so we're going through this economic transformation that has a whole variety of elements, and the island's government has been pretty determined to kind of go down this path and make sure that we create the environment that actually encourages ripe investment. I've got a couple more slides, and then I'm going to stop so that the other panelists can really dig into the meat of the matter. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the COVID world and the reality that's shifting the opportunities. Universally, this idea of a dramatic reduction in general economic opportunity as a result of the coronavirus is pretty much understood. But what I would argue is that this also creates the environment for different types of investment, and to actually accelerate. Coronavirus is actually accelerating some trends that we saw happening even before. So this idea of health and health security becoming the most important global issue in coming months and years, protectionist trade policies to protect supply chains for Europe, but also these trends that investments in environmental technologies, fintech, blockchain, cybersecurity will continue to grow. This is really a values question. I think what coronavirus is forcing everyone to ask itself is what are our values, not only as it relates to kind of those around us and how we spend our time, but what are our values as it relates to how we take care of the environment and how we ensure that we're able to continue to take advantage of what it means to live here on this earth. And so from an Invest Puerto Rico perspective, we've kind of said, okay, we're going to focus on this message of resilience and telling the island story, because after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, only 10% of business, 40% of businesses closed and never reopened. After Hurricanes Maria and Irma here, only 10% of businesses closed and never reopened. What we also know is that from a resilience perspective, that these issues of force majeure or pandemics or those sorts of things are impacting all of the world. But the markets that are most able to bounce back are the ones that have been through it before. So Puerto Rico has been through it before. So we want to elevate those messages, and we think those are very important. And that a critical element of the long-term resilience of Puerto Rico, critical elements will be kind of our ability to create food security, as well as our ability to solve the energy challenge. We're going to continue focusing on our targeted sectors. We're going to position Puerto Rico as a remote work location, and we're going to also position Puerto Rico as a solution to address pharma supply chain challenges. For those that don't know, Puerto Rico is the largest pharmaceutical exporter in the country. And then, you know, some of the highlights, I think, as it relates to ag tech and renewable energy, why these are sectors that we should have a very focused agenda around is, you know, from a food security perspective, 33% of Puerto Rico's population age 18 and older are at risk of facing food insecurity. 21.7% of those interviewed, and these are numbers that just came out in the last few months, 21.7% of those interviewed said that in the 12 months prior to the study, there were times when they had to eat less food or stop eating one of their daily meals. Some of the ag tech opportunities we're seeing are in technology assisted agricultural technology. That's everything from how do you get water to spots in a better way, to how do you more efficiently do vertical agriculture. We're seeing new agriculture, and we're also seeing revolutionary ag opportunities. And on the renewable energy side, we see Puerto Rico's Energy Public Policy Act, which was signed in 2019, which set a goal that 40% of the island's electricity from renewable resources by 2025 and 100% by 2050. That's very aggressive, and generally, talking to most people that said that we don't see how we get there. Well, I'll tell you how we get there. It's going to be through strategic partnerships, through collaborations, and through external investment coming in to actually figure out how do we help reach those numbers. So we want to be bullish on figuring out how to do that. It's important to note that as an organization that goes out and brings new business to the island, we do not have a focus on ag tech. We do not have a focus on renewable energy, yet we still see a tremendous portion of our pipeline coming from these sectors, that these investors, that these companies are finding the opportunities as well as the incentives code in Puerto Rico to be drivers that are worth deeper consideration and pushing things forward. I know we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm not going to spend much more time other than to say, you know, we bring a competitive tax incentive structure, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that later. Prime geographic location at the heart of Caribbean, an attractive quality of life, unprecedented investment. So I mentioned we've got 10+ billion coming in federal dollars, not to mention the private sector dollar. An educated and skilled workforce. We have a higher concentration of STEM graduates than almost anywhere in the country. And its stability of U.S. jurisdiction. So for a variety of reasons, Puerto Rico makes sense for companies in agricultural technologies as well as in renewable energy to consider further investment. I look forward to the rest of the panel and digging deeper into this and other elements. Thank you. I think next we're passing it to, I believe, James or Yadi for their presentation.
Yes, great. So let me share my screen. Okay. Great, so everyone can kind of see my screen, okay? Great, all right, awesome. So I'm going to kind of jump right in. Again, thank you so much for having me be part of this conference. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. I think there is a lot of opportunity here in this market, and I'm very excited to also be speaking alongside the other presenters. So yeah, to kind of build on that initial intro I gave, again, I'm the operations director at Agritecture. A lot of the work that I do specifically is around overseeing the economic analysis portion of those feasibility studies I talked about, and really just trying to figure out, realistic scenarios for people who are interested in starting their own urban farms. And so Agritecture actually as a company, we started out as a blog around 8 to 9 years ago. And it was meant as this platform to kind of be able to do your own research in an accessible way around controlled environment agriculture. And what actually ended up happening is a lot of people started reaching out to us and going like, well, hey, this information is great. I want to start my own farm. Can you help us out? And that's really how the consulting arm of our business was born. So fast forward to today, we have over 125 projects globally, and we work in over 15 cities in 25 countries worldwide. So now to jump into the good stuff. I always like to include this image in my presentations because I feel like it contextualizes the different types of urban agriculture in a really interesting way. And it also brings home the point that there's no one size fits all when it comes to urban ag. So if I'm going to start all the way at the left on the low-tech side, we have the example of community soil-based agriculture. These are community farms. You find a lot of them typically in a lot of US cities. And they have a number of benefits, one of the major ones being that they provide accessible food to their local neighborhoods and communities, but there is also a really big environmental benefit they have as well. So in New York City in specific, when it rains more than 1 inch, the rainwater and the sewage water combine in the sewer system, and they're then released into the river. And so that is a huge environmental cost. And so now what the Department of Environmental Protection does is they try to support these farms because the soil can percolate the rainwater rather than the concrete. And so that benefit is huge for this city. And the point here is to kind of say that the benefit that you'll find in some community farms is not going to be the same as, the benefits you have from other farms on this list. So if we jump all the way to the right, to the high-tech side, we have the example of a commercial vertical farm. We have Aero Farms in specific, which is a large-scale warehouse conversion vertical farm in New Jersey. They have stacked hydroponic systems, hydroponic meaning, you do not use soil. And how these farms essentially work is that we are trying to control all of the inputs that the plant needs to grow and trying to create the perfect environment for that plant. So the water itself is recirculating through the system. We are controlling the ventilation and HVAC, trying to create that perfect temperature for the crops. We're giving as many nutrients as the crop needs in that specific time. We're controlling the lighting as that replaces the sunlight, all kind of with the goal of producing a really healthy, nutritious crop that's pesticide-free. Now, the benefit of this farm in specific, again, is not the same as the environmental benefit we just spoke about, but when this farm was constructed, it employed around 70 people in that neighborhood, which was a really big economic opportunity for that community. And so I wanted to bring this up just to kind of show that the first step when we're thinking about investment in controlled environment agriculture is we want to ask ourselves, what does Puerto Rico need right now? What does the community need right now? And more importantly, what crops do we need to grow? Because that's also going to inform the type of system that is going to be implemented in the area. Now, jumping into the economic opportunity, there is about $80 billion in global urban ag opportunity. Again, when you're looking at the whole field of urban agriculture, like community soil-based agriculture, farming at home, that number becomes much bigger. But we're really looking at controlled environment ag, so growing indoors via vertical farming or greenhouse growing. And there's also a lot of research that estimates that urban agriculture could produce at least 10% of the global output of a lot of vegetables as well, which is a really big deal. So to jump into those drivers a little bit more, the economic drivers, I tried to bring in some examples which were as specific to the local area as possible. The market isn't necessarily my specialty, but I think there are a lot of things and benefits that we can kind of connect here as well. So to start with urban challenges, you see this statistic a lot if you've seen any kind of presentation on sustainability. 80% of all food is expected to be consumed in cities or highly populated urban areas by 2050. In regards to policy, there are many vacant buildings available in Puerto Rico in specific, and that can produce a lot of jobs through urban ag and thus be supported financially by the government. When it comes to supply threats, this is no surprise, but in 2017, farmers and PR lost an estimated 780 million in agriculture yields due to hurricane damage, which is definitely another big kind of issue to think about here. When it comes to growth potential, this is with vertical farming in specific, but the vertical farming market is projected to grow at 25% over the next 5 years. And if we're to go back to that 2017 to 2018 year, we saw another record-breaking year for AgTech investments. There was a 43% increase in funding between those 2 years. And finally, local demand. This is something that I want to talk about a little bit more, actually, what I want to focus on. So 85% of food is imported, and PR produces only 15% of what's consumed on the island. And so I think that's actually, probably in my opinion, one of the biggest opportunities we can speak about here. So what I ended up doing was I looked at the estimated value of vegetable products, specifically vegetable products that are imported into the island, and that was about 245 million. And then I chose just 5 different crops that could be grown in via controlled environment agriculture, and I put the value of them here. So if we look at tomatoes, peppers, both can be grown pretty successfully in a greenhouse in the local climate, and you have a value of 720,000, about 550,000. I added spices in here because spices do require some processing, but you can grow the herbs in a similar environment. Root vegetables. So root vegetables is interesting because when there was a lot of hurricane damage that happened, and when we're talking about the damage to the yields in the island, root vegetables were actually probably the least impacted because they grow underground. But if we try to protect the environment they grow in a little bit more and try to control that environment a bit more, that risk can go down even further. In this example, I brought this in here. I don't want to go into it too much. I can discuss it later if you want to reach out to me to talk about this. But this was a study that we did a couple years ago where we compared 3 different types of crops if they were grown in 3 different types of environments, all large-scale facilities. So we compared a greenhouse, conventional growing, which is outdoor multi-acre farming, and a vertical farm. And the results were actually very interesting and I think very relevant here. But we saw that with greenhouse growing, the energy costs involved, so the energy costs of, like the ventilation and HVAC, when compared to the cost of food miles from transporting product from California to New York, we actually saw that the carbon emissions per square foot per year were much less when it came to growing in a greenhouse locally and distributing locally, rather than having that food being imported or brought across the country. And so obviously, given that really high import cost, it's important to realize here that there isn't just an economic opportunity when it comes to CEA. There's also a really big environmental one as well. So I wanted to include a couple case studies of some previous clients of ours, some case studies that I think will be interesting and relevant to the local area. So I'll start with Square Roots. This is a farming facility based in Brooklyn, New York. Consists of 10 different container farms, again, as you could see, growing in a vertical environment. And Square Roots is essentially an entrepreneurship program. So they bring in 10 entrepreneurs who are interested in urban agriculture, and they put them through their program for a year. And what they do is they learn everything from how to grow in that system to, how to manage a farming business. And the goal is essentially, these entrepreneurs will graduate from this program, start their own farms and their own businesses themselves, thus benefiting the local economy and increasing that market. And so I think this could definitely be interesting for Puerto Rico because we already have, as was mentioned, a really highly skilled labor force. There are a lot of specialty, agriculture programs out there. So I think something like this could really pair well with that. And the second case study I wanted to bring in was Sky Vegetables. This was actually a facility I helped manage for about 1.5 to 2 years. It is a 10,000 square foot hydroponic greenhouse on top of an affordable housing unit in the Bronx, New York. It's a low income area. You could see the greenhouse, it's lit at the top of the building itself. And so what we worked on was developing the business model for this facility. And what we did was we figured out a model where we could grow enough premium produce to offset the cost of distributing for free or for a subsidized amount to the local community. And I wanted to bring this example in because, it is possible to kind of distribute in an equitable way locally. And I think probably the best way to do that is to make sure that's included in your business model from day one. And finally, this is kind of my last point, but as a company, we've sort of figured out that it's important for architects and planners and investors and developers and just the local community in general to be able to access reliable models on urban agriculture and also be able to source the operators for that as well. And so what we have done as a company is we've developed a digital tool called Agritecture Designer. And it's essentially an accessible way for you to kind of build out those models. So how it works is you put in your inputs for your farm, like the scale, the location you're in, the investment you have, and the result will kind of be this financial overview with a CapEx breakout, OpEx breakout, returns, and hopefully a really interesting tool that you could use if you're interested in this space or investing in this space. So you can reach out to me if you have further information. My email is on the slide, yara@agritecture.com. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Yara. And I guess last but not least, I'll have a go and share a little bit about the renewable sector and also the opportunities that we see, as I mentioned in my very brief intro, for sharing information. It'll be a lot less scientific and less structured. But as I said, the opportunity that I see for islands has really changed in the last few years with the advent of communications. Previously, places that maybe were geographically isolated from each other would have to go to London or DC or New York to be able to interact. Their policymakers would be. And now, of course, what we're seeing is the advent of direct island-to-island interactions, even through Zoom calls like this. Michael attended the week before last our event, the Virtual Island Summit, where we had over 10,000 stakeholders from islands all over the world join in to share information. And of course, one of the big areas is energy, but things like agriculture, as Yara said, and waste management, tourism, there's a whole range of different things that in an island environment, you can't draw neat lines between. I mean, if you think about the tourism sector, and the agriculture sector, there's a clear overlap there for many island communities of what is driving the demand and the type of products. Pre-COVID, of course, we're in a new world now. We're not quite sure how things will evolve. The waste management sector as well. You can't necessarily talk about that in isolation from things like energy and tourism and agriculture. And so what we want to do is trying to find ways of breaking down these silos. The first one, as I said, being distance. How do you have a useful conversation between Puerto Rico and Fiji and Okinawa and Mauritius and some really disparate places that are looking at similar issues? The second one is political status. And obviously Puerto Rico falls in a kind of gray zone in terms of politics, which and this is coming from Puerto Ricans that I know. They often feel like, and please correct me in the chat if you don't, but often feel like you're looking north to the United States and not at the opportunities for the islands surrounding. And so Puerto Rico is of course part of the Caribbean archipelago, but as part of the United States, there are somewhat limits the opportunities to interact with some of the surrounding islands. Similarly for other territories like Guadeloupe, the British Virgin Islands, San Andres and Providencia, they fall in this Caribbean archipelago, but politics prevents some of the opportunities to link. And so by using these technologies, what we say is, well, actually, we can help create conversations like we're having today to share information. And obviously, information only takes us so far. What I would say is actually we have a lot of the tech solutions that we need, whether it's in energy or agriculture or waste management. The tech exists. That is not necessarily the problem. I often see kind of inventors or businesses pitching the next big thing in energy, but we haven't necessarily used the technology that we already have today and implemented that. And so I think it's good that we're having a conversation about finance. I'll say right out, I am not a finance expert by any means, but clearly to get things moving and to implement a lot of this technology, we need good finance and we need good policy. And one of the issues that I've seen is that sometimes what makes sense for an island as a whole is not necessarily replicated in the interests of the specific parties. So I won't say which island I'm talking about, but some of the smaller islands, actually this could be several different islands in the Eastern Caribbean. A great example of this is the advent of electric vehicles. It's widely accepted that electric vehicles make sense overall for the Caribbean. You can't drive very far in a lot of islands. Maybe Puerto Rico is larger, but particularly some of the smaller islands like Barbados or Barbuda are very small and quite flat. So electric vehicles in that sense make a lot of sense. The fuel cost is high in many Caribbean islands. And so great, why aren't we all driving electric vehicles? Well, Barbados is one island actually that has done quite well with this, but the rest of the Caribbean is somewhat lacking. And so in some cases, what happens is the governments make a lot of money from fuel duties. So fuel duties, the government incentive there is that fuel duties actually provide a huge part of the tax base. That means that by moving to electric vehicles, you're losing some of your income. Of course, there is another income stream from selling more electricity, but the government themselves may not have that income. And so you have this misalignment of priorities, whereas it makes sense for the whole economy to move towards electric vehicles, but actually some parties will lose, and even if it's the government, that actually creates a barrier to move forward. And so I think it's absolutely vital when we're talking about finance, you also need to have, particularly in a smaller economy or a smaller island economy, you need to have alignment of policymakers, of policy and finance and technology. And so this isn't the case everywhere, but I do think in many cases, the tech is already very much there. So I've talked a bit about electric vehicles. I think that's a huge opportunity, but more broadly on renewables, for those who don't know, renewables are widely seen as beneficial, very beneficial for the Caribbean. I think sometimes in a broader international conversation, they get mixed up. You know, you can talk about a US context. Certain renewables may not always make financial sense in every situation. Well, broadly in the Caribbean, you can make a generalization that renewables make sense. That's simply because in most Caribbean islands, you're paying anywhere from 3 to 5 times more for energy than you are in, say, Florida. The cost of electricity is really, really expensive. And so fundamentally, economically, you have an incentive there to move to renewables. And I think, the uptake has been slow again because of this misalignment of finance and misalignment of policy. And it's very, very different from every island has its own. Puerto Rico, for many reasons, as have been discussed already, is probably in a better situation than some other islands in terms of the resources available to move to renewables. But in other situations, with, for example, the utility, maybe not so beneficial. But overall, Puerto Rico is probably seen as one of the leaders, which I think is really, really exciting. So renewables make sense for a lot of islands. I think that what we'd like to see is actually the long term. I think finance offers an exciting opportunity because actually in many islands, 5 to 7 years is all you need to pay back the cost of installing solar or wind systems, particularly solar. And these systems may last 20 to 25 years. So from a financial perspective, we should be seeing far more investment in the wider Caribbean, as we're seeing to an extent in Puerto Rico, in renewables. But of course, it's not that simple. The availability of finance is not equal across the region. And I think one real challenge this year is going to be how COVID-19 has really changed the playing field, particularly for many independent countries. A huge bulk of the income is from tourism. Aruba being the most effective, 90% of Aruba's income is from tourism. So it's great to say we want to invest in renewables or agriculture or waste management, but the reality is if the money's not there, we can't necessarily do that. And so again, some territories may have slightly different income streams or maybe slightly more diverse, but the Caribbean as a region as a whole is the most tourism dependent part of the entire world. And so You know, I just wanted to put that to wrap up, just to put that out there to say that it's really difficult to have this conversation, not knowing where we'll be in a year's time in terms of the availability of finance. So I'll leave it there, and probably we can move to any questions. And if anyone has any specific questions, happy to answer those. Over to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, James. Thank you, Yara. Thank you, Rodrick, for those presentations. The truth is some of the information that you guys have put out there, it basically negates several of the questions that I had for our panel. So we'll be able to make this a little bit shorter so we can run right into a Q&A with the attendees. But let me go ahead and switch this to Galaxy View or whatever that's supposed to be. Give me 1 second.
If it's okay, while you're doing that, I'd love to just chime in on something James said. James was talking about this challenge, and I think this is what we're faced with across the globe. It's the COVID-19 has put a different kind of spin on how investors are looking out investing their dollars. The reality is right now, there's not a shortage of capital to be invested in the market. The real question is how much of that capital is willing to go out there with the uncertainty that's ahead of us. I think the reality of markets like Puerto Rico is that, you know, fortunately, our island is not overly dependent on tourism. It's only about 7% of the economy here in Puerto Rico. And then there are a variety of things that have been put in place to actually, you know, accelerate investment both on the pharma side as well as on the energy side as well as on the farming side. From an energy perspective, of course, there's an incentive that provides local and foreign companies that manufacture or assemble renewable energy equipment with tax incentives and credit, including a 4% fixed income tax rate for 15 years, a tax credit that's equal to 50% of the cost of machinery, up to 50% of the credit for qualified research and development, and 90% exemption from real and personal property tax for 15 years. And that's just on the energy side. On the pharma side, for bona fide farmers, which we can talk about how that's defined, is generally defined as a farmer who certified by the government who derives at least 50% of his or her gross income from the ag business. But there are also similar sorts of really aggressive incentives to try and figure out how to help farmers be successful and expand in Puerto Rico.
Awesome, Rodrick. Good points. Let me jump in here. I want to be just the moderator, but I do have a couple of points that can write on the back of that. One of which is in the broader view of things, when people are trying to build out their business plans, right, and trying to figure out what the market is like specifically for food production on the island. As you pointed out, or somebody pointed out earlier, only a small amount of food that is consumed on the island here in Puerto Rico is actually produced here on the island. Now, that's not accounting for the fruit trees that a lot of us and a lot of Puerto Ricans have like in their backyard, right? But even if we account for that, the number may only be at most 20% of food is produced here, right? That, in my mind, means that you don't necessarily have to take in considerations that you do in other countries, i.e., what is the exportability of the food product that you're trying to build a business around, right? You can worry just about the local market. Basically, anything that you can produce and distribute here has a market, whether that is direct to consumer, or contracts with the various grocers across the island is, you know, that's depending on other things, other factors. But basically, if you can produce it here, you have a market for it here. The competition, in some ways, this is a blue ocean. If everyone's familiar with blue ocean, red ocean strategies, Puerto Rico itself is a blue ocean when it comes to food production in general, right? Also, another thing to consider when it comes to both of these spaces, right, renewables and AgTech, and businesses or small businesses or startups within these spaces, you have a wealth of talent here. I think maybe you spoke to that earlier, Rodrick. UPR, University of Puerto Rico, has very, as well as other universities here in Puerto Rico, have very robust agriculture focused programs. They produce a lot of very qualified agronomists, a lot of people with young people with plenty of field experience. The problem is that they don't have enough incentives to stay here. And I want to bring up that point because I feel like we have a whole wealth of potential entrepreneurs that just need the right mix of financial and public incentives to establish themselves as entrepreneurs on the island. The vertical ag space is a perfect one for many of these young folks to get into instead of, and staying inside their own communities, right? Instead of a lot of these small towns out here hemorrhaging young people to the rest of the states and other parts of the world who are perfectly qualified to stay here and move forward in creating these food systems and burgeoning small businesses. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there. Does anybody else have some points real quick before I send out some questions to you?
Well, just quickly on that ag side, I think it's easy to forget back to March and April how scary it was for a lot of the islands that rely on imports of food. And I think that was a wake-up call, Puerto Rico included, but some of the smaller islands, again, I mentioned Aruba, even more so, where you have like 99% of your food is imported. So that did wake people up to the fact of the reality of this independence and or lack of independence. And luckily, the supply chains held. But at one point, we didn't know that the supply chains were going to hold, right? But still, it's cheaper to grow chickens in Georgia and take them down to the Eastern Caribbean than it is to grow chickens in the Caribbean. Some veg, it's a bit different, but a lot of times that is just the fact, that there is either not the scale or the costs are so much higher. And a lot of these islands, a few decades ago had that infrastructure, and it's just not there anymore. So reducing what has happened, and there's a whole variety of reasons for that, is challenging, but hopefully people are at least waking up a bit to the value. But unfortunately, people still tend to buy whatever's cheapest, even if it's not in long-term interest.
True. My backyard chickens would almost disagree with you, James. I don't know if you guys have been hearing the roosters asserting themselves outside. But there's some truth to what you're saying. I mean, like, can you reduce the cost? I mean, for me to have just 20-ish birds free ranging outside, there's still a substantially higher cost than if I were just to buy eggs from the grocery store. However, in terms of resilience, I have my own food supply outside. Now, from an island-wide perspective, again, the more you can drive down distribution costs and the more you can place those food systems here, the more resilient, obviously, the island is to these hurricane impacts. And in the long term, may be able to participate in, more in larger economies, right? Trade within the Caribbean, trade with, certain states such as Florida, et cetera. I mean, there are groups out there working specifically to create a market for Puerto Rican goods and foods directly within the closest state, which happens to be Florida at this point. So anybody else have a note? Anybody want to add anything real quick before I jump into a question? Good. All right. So here we go. I'm going to try not to do any curveballs, everyone. So my first question is for Rodrick and Yara. And it's kind of a broad scope. So however you can speak to this is fine, but what might be some of the available investment options in the vertical agriculture space specifically, right? When you're talking about agriculture in general, you can do everything from investing in RITs to equity or project equity in some cases. Here in Puerto Rico, this is still sort of new territory when it comes to vertical agriculture, at least. So, what would be sort of if you're going to pull out your crystal ball, what would be some of the investment options for this space? Go ahead. You guys can unmute your microphones.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rodrick. I think you know a lot more about this than I do.
I mean, I think, one of the challenges I would say and opportunities is that Puerto Rico is wide open. I mean, we've got of course Kendall Lang on the line who's doing amazing stuff out there at Fusion Farms. What I found is that by and large, there hasn't been kind of the cluster hasn't developed in a way to where it's like other clusters such as manufacturing and some of the other ones that are more established. I think Puerto Rico really has just a swath of opportunities. It's really limited to what the entrepreneur or what the company can do in terms of their sweet spot. Across the board, we're underinvested in agriculture, so and vertical farming. So I think across the board, there's a need for any type of investment that an investor can make sense, make sense. The reality is we are seeing a trend of a lot more urban farming happening now in Puerto Rico. I know of an agripreneur who's renting out rooftops of grocery stores and restaurants to try and help them figure out how to grow more food. I know of agripreneurs who actually have innovative technologies that they're bringing to the island, and because of the island's 6 different microclimates, they're able to test it out in different sorts of environments. So there are a variety of investment opportunities, and I would say because the lack of the strength of that sector here on the island, I think it's wide open. And because of the need, there is a lot of not only support from an incentives perspective locally, but there are also funds such as Synieto Ventures and others that are here on island trying to figure out how to grow that space more. With that, I'll pass to Yara.
Yeah, I'll also kind of, to jump on what Rodrick was saying, I think what we've seen is that a lot of the investment comes again from the need. So we'll see a lot of uptick in investment and support from policymakers. For example, when, the climate goes up and it's too hot to farm, or, if in turn, those incentives for investors will be more available, and we kind of see an uptick that way. I would say the most popular type of investment we see is venture capital, but or that's at least the most popular that you read about. But I think the other types are really just individuals who are affiliated to the space in some sort of way and are interested in the space. And the second thing is existing companies, large-scale companies, whether they're equipment providers or farms themselves that may want to expand. We also see some investment coming in that way. But yeah, it always kind of comes back to the need and the opportunity, which I think is really big for the island.
Thank you. All right, so the next question would be for Rodrick and James, and it's very similar in terms of what might some of the investment vehicles for renewables be, right? Where CEA, Controlled Environment Agriculture, Vertical Agriculture, may have different industries that intersect with it, right? So technology, IT, food production, obviously. The renewables and energy is a little bit different animal when we're discussing this, and specifically for the Caribbean, do we have the government incentives in place on some of these islands, specifically in Puerto Rico? What are some of the options that people can look at for improving the outcomes in the renewable space and improving their portfolio by investing in it? I know it's a broad question, so speak on anything that comes to mind with that particular question.
I'll kick it off before passing it off to James. I think one of the things to note is that there probably isn't a more important issue for Puerto Rico than the question of energy. Our energy costs are significantly higher than they are in the States. And it continues to be a challenge, even as we, given that 50% of our economy is basically manufacturing, which is a heavy energy user. So what we've seen is a few things that are happening. There's been aggressive legislation to try and spur additional renewable energy production on the island that passed last year. So that is one of the really important elements. The other element, is that in addition to that policy, the incentives are great, and then there are some federal investments, I think, which it would just be ridiculous not to actually talk about that. There was $13 billion investment announced in Puerto Rico last week, about $9.5 billion actually to go to investment in the energy facilities related to PREPA. Um, this is important context. So you've got a few things that are a perfect storm. You've got policy that's saying we want more renewable energy. You've got incentives that are there specifically to encourage renewable energy. You've got federal dollars to actually encourage federal dollars making a direct investment in energy. And then you've got a strong business base, which I would say this is probably one of the differences between many other parts of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico actually has a strong business base in terms of not only manufacturing, but finance and insurance. And so that strong business base not only needs reliable energy. We've seen solutions on the island that range everything from, the solar to, and microgrids to, now there's even a ocean thermal project that's supposed to be happening on the island. So we're seeing that as the island continues to rebound, there are a variety of doors or roads, and they all lead to, we need better energy, we need more reliable energy. And so there are a lot of tools to actually help make that happen. And I think a willingness by the government to support it, but also by private enterprises to make investments in it because they need it for the sustainability of their businesses.
Thanks, Rodrick. And obviously Puerto Rico has certain investment and incentives that are available specifically, or maybe the US Virgin Islands also has, but that the rest of the Caribbean does not have. So it makes it quite a different concept. I would say, kind of maybe to flip the question a little bit, that in parts of the Caribbean, for example, Curacao in the Dutch Caribbean, there's actually been efforts in the opposite direction in terms of suspending any growth in renewables. So particularly when it comes to this huge kind of battle, which Puerto Rico is a slightly different context, but in general for the Caribbean, there's a huge battle between utilities and homeowners. Homeowners want to have, in general, homeowners want to have their own solar systems, especially in Puerto Rico, where there's maybe a little bit of a distrust for the grid after the failures that have happened in the past. And Puerto Rico, again, is different because there are laws that actually make it much easier than in most places to guarantee that homeowners can, on some level, have their own solar. In other islands, as I said, Curacao, there's actually been efforts to tax, they call it a solar tax, to stop that. And it's very easy. I mean, everyone, no matter where you live, likes to criticize the utility, right? It's really easy to criticize a utility. And I nowhere more than Puerto Rico do people like to criticize their electric utility. But across the whole region, that's the same. But what really concerns me in the long term is this idea of utility death spiral. So as people do increasingly have and install solar or renewables, that's great. That's great for many reasons. The person who loses out, or the organization, I should say, that loses out is the utility when people install solar on their roofs. Now, it's difficult for most people to feel much sympathy for a utility company, right? It's not something that naturally people are that concerned about. But what concerns me is when we get to a point where all the wealthy people have installed solar, those that can't afford to have not, and the utility collapses completely. There's going to be a transition point where it's there's always going to be a level, no matter how cheap renewables are, that some people cannot afford to install it on their roofs. And so this is going to happen in big continental utilities as well, but the situation has been sped up in a lot of islands. In Puerto Rico, it was hyper sped up because of the hurricane, but in other islands, the fact that you have these increased costs, you have a small market, you see it very quickly. So I worry in the next 10 years you might see utilities disappearing or just going completely bankrupt, a lack of a base to be able to support that. Obviously in Puerto Rico, I'm not an expert on what happened in Puerto Rico, but some of these, there's a lot of this context there. But the reality is if a utility can't supply power, who is going to bring power to the poorest people. So it's easy to be really kind of in favor of home solar, and I am an advocate for that. I want that, but we need to find a mechanism that ensures that whatever happens in this transition, that the poorest still have energy at the end of the day, or electricity. And I don't know if that is something that people are generally aware of. So Michael, I've purposely skirted the question on finance mechanisms because that's not something that I'm particularly knowledgeable about, but I hope that's some useful context.
Broad question, but let me ask you this real quick, James. Here in the Caribbean, do you have examples of any at least marginally successful community level renewable energy systems as small businesses for that community? Does that make sense?
I mean, there's some great examples in Puerto Rico. Casa Pueblo is one of the best examples, right? And there are some really locally driven projects like that, which do a great job in that community. And now Casa Pueblo does a great job for that community. Is that going to be replicable in every single small town in Puerto Rico is the question. You know, it's great to see that. And I hope so. I mean, I love those models and I love that idea. But we're not seeing that yet. So I would love to see a world where, you know, every small town has got this kind of locally grounded system where people are able to take advantage of that. But we're not seeing that transition yet, and it's not necessarily a transition from large centralized utilities to these local ones that is going to happen easily. I know there've been efforts to do that with PREPA, but I'm not sure actually on the latest in that situation. So yeah, other parts of the Caribbean, I'm trying to think of any other examples. There have been efforts on a small scale, and probably there's some really good efforts to do that in outside of the region as well. But no, I don't have many other good examples beyond that.
No, good answers. Thank you. Listen, I want to do one last panel question before we do about 3 questions from the audience that have come up. And before I go any further, one of the questions that came up is, why are there no Puerto Ricans on this panel? And I want to immediately, I meant to address this at the beginning. This is an introduction. This conference, everyone who is attending or sees this on YouTube later, this is our introduction. These are broad strokes into investing in island resilience. This is outreach to outside investment groups across Europe, the US, and potentially Asia as well. The next panel that I am planning that several of us are going to be working on is going to be locals, is going to be specifically with local entrepreneurs that are in these spaces, or vertical agriculture and vertical agriculture entrepreneurs who have integrated renewables with their systems. So this is just one in a series of conferences that we're going to do. I do want to address that. Rodrick and myself are local transplants to Puerto Rico. In fact, in Rodrick and myself, as far as I know, we live here full time. We live here with our families. And so we try to integrate as much as possible with our communities here. And so this isn't just for me, this is for my daughters who live here as well. I notice my camera's shaking a lot. I have this table. And so we're generally out there, as well as other people that we work with, our colleagues are out there scouting out local talent, people that are in a good position to do outreach to outside funding, things like that. I'm here with everybody else on the island. What affects you affects me. I had the distinct privilege of being 6 days without power during the earthquakes a few months back, the COVID lockdowns, etc. I actually came here initially, just so everyone understands, I initially came here with the Army Reserves. I'm still an Army reservist, so I do part-time work with the military as part of I work in civil affairs. So I came here to help set up medical missions on the island, and have also worked to ensure that the ag sector and other spaces get some attention from military programs that are meant to rebuild and help some of these communities, right? So I guess I just use that as an example of how integrated my own life is here. I know Rodrick's is as well. Our other two panelists have a lot of experience on the ground in their spaces, and especially James here in the Caribbean in general. But again, we are going to bring local talent to front and center in our next series of panels. So I just want to put that out there. And going into the next question, Yara and James. So this will just be our last broad question before we do a couple from the audience. Are renewable energy systems an essential part of island CEAs? Are renewable energy systems an essential part of vertical agricultural systems, and more specifically, especially on islands?
Yeah, I'll jump right into that. So I would say yes. I mean, in general, yes. So, for those that might not be as familiar with CEA, you do need a pretty sustainable energy source in order to kind of run these systems, whether that's done, with the lighting, if it's a fully indoor controlled environment, or, just to run those HVAC systems. Now, there's something important here, to be fully realistic. The amount of energy that you need in a vertical farm, especially when you go really large scale, might not be something that can be covered fully with solar today. And so, but that's not to say that there aren't kind of some other options too, before kind of working towards that and making it more accessible. We see some greenhouse models now that might not need, artificial lighting. You can kind of use the sunlight. You can kind of take advantage of the local climate, have kind of natural ventilation going through those greenhouses, and really just use energy when in the colder months, when the sun might not be out as much, or you need the environment to be a little bit warmer. Then we can start to see, more sustainable models where renewables are more integrated. It's obviously more affordable, more efficient. And I think the latter is probably, again, this is like a very general assessment, but I think the latter is probably what's most suitable for Puerto Rico at this time, given, everything from, any disaster risk to, not always having full access to utilities 24/7. So I would say it's important. I think there's a really big opportunity there. I think we do still need to work towards that. Just like the field of renewables in general, it's changing year by year, becoming more and more affordable, accessible. There's obviously policy challenges, which was discussed a little bit earlier, but yeah, I think I could see like some successful models coming up, specifically, greenhouses and using, any kind of artificial lighting or controls in colder months.
Yeah, I think I'll just add from a different angle, not being from the kind of deep within the agricultural tech sector, but we were talking about the big incentive, or one of the big incentives for agriculture in the islands is not that it's necessarily cheaper, but that it provides that it provides independence to some level. And so if you don't combine the renewable energy into the agriculture, you're also not recreating the level of independence there from import. So I think that's a big reason to include it. But as well, renewable energy economically makes sense. And so if you're able to get the investment for an agricultural project, then why not get a little bit more and ensure that it has a renewable component as well, to the renewable component as well, to provide cheaper power than you most likely be paying if you were buying it from the grid. I'm not sure about the situation in Puerto Rico, but in terms of other examples, in Jamaica, the Jamaican Development Bank, and I think in the Belizean Development Bank also, I'm sure this is a case in other countries, provide loans to farmers to be able to install renewables, appreciating that most farmers in the Caribbean do not have the capital to upfront make huge investments in renewables that you would need to relative to the size of your business, but they have specialist loans aimed at these. Normally the loans are pay themselves back in 5 to 7 years depending on the context. And I've seen this again, I bring up the example of chicken farms because that's the one I know from Jamaica. chicken farms use a huge amount of energy because you have to cool the sheds that you keep them in. Of course, the most energy they used is when the sun that is needed is when the sun is at its hottest. So solar makes a lot of sense. And chicken farmers in Jamaica have been able to invest in solar with this funding from the Jamaican Development Bank, pay it back, and at the end of the day, they are able to then have more funds that they can continue to reinvest in other parts of their business as well. So I think, again, that's not necessarily a CEA, but more broadly with agriculture, for an example.
Thank you, James and Yara, and of course, Rodrick, with these kind of broad questions that we brought to the table and your guys' very detailed answers. This opens up so many more questions and ideas that hopefully we can go over in further panels. Listen, I want to go ahead and do a couple of questions from the audience, give us all time to speak on it. Before everybody leaves, any of our panelists that can stay an additional 20 minutes, if you can, great. If you have to go after this last round of questions, again, thank you for being here. But we're going to do an additional 20 minutes with a local vertical ag farm. It is a recently proven business model out of Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. As far as I know, they're currently working to integrate renewables with their system. And it's actually an aquaponics driven system. So they have fish integrated to this vertical, to the CEA. So Kendall and possibly Lisa of Fusion Farms will be joining us right after 1:30 or 13:30 for those of you that use military time like I do. And so for 20 minutes, they can explain a little bit about their business model and hopefully speak to some of the more technical aspects of the financing and the outputs that they've been able to create locally here in Puerto Rico. And again, I want to address that we are going to be bringing local talent front and center for future panels as well. This is just the intro. So bear with us. Let me get to a couple of questions. So let me go back up here real quick. Okay, so from Michael Blacker. First of all, thank you all for your time and expertise, specifically to Yara. I expect to be purchasing an 18-acre property in the mountains of Juana Diaz within 3 months. What would be involved to get some help preparing a feasibility study for this project? Before the 3 months are complete, I will need to prepare a business plan, and the feasibility study would obviously be an important part of this. Thank you. So that might be a question for Yara, as well as maybe if Rodrick has any input afterwards as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, so firstly, this is exactly the kind of work that we do. And so definitely feel free to reach out to me after this panel, and we can hopefully kind of discuss your project a little bit further. You know, but in general, I was looking at some other questions in the chat, and you know, the first step when it comes to any sort of feasibility planning for your own farming concept is determining the market and understanding your market in a really kind of really detailed way, because it informs the types of crops that you'll be growing and the demand that's available as well. And both of those things feed into the design of a farm and the scale in which you're going to build as well. And in turn, all of that, of course, comes back to if you have the demand, you have people that are purchasing, and you will be able to generate sustainable revenue for your business, which will hopefully, you know, as well feed the local economy as well. It looks like you have a pretty large scale facility. I think, you know, let's definitely discuss, you know, other than those things, I would say definitely think about the climate as well locally. If you want to do a mix of indoor and outdoor growing, what that would look like. And then, you know, just kind of relate that to any of the goals and objectives that you may have for your business. So yeah, so I would say definitely feel free to reach out. We can kind of talk about that further and yeah, hopefully grow that concept for you. All
right, thank you, Yara. So the next question is from Andrew Kaskow. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, Andrew, please write me later and let me know. So the question coming from Andrew is, did Puerto Rico recently announce an additional tax or fee on energy users with solar connected to the grid? And will this accelerate high wealth income users disconnecting from the grid? Is there any good data or reports on the resilience of solar and ability? Oh, second part of this. Is there any good data or reports on the resilience of solar and ability to withstand hurricane winds? So if anyone can speak to that first part, I'm sure James can really speak to that second part. Rodrick, do you have some insight on that? You got on mute.
Yeah, could you repeat the first part of that question? I think I got it, but I want to make sure I got it. It had a couple of different curves and edges. Can you just repeat it one more time?
Did Puerto Rico recently announce an additional tax fee on energy users with solar connected to the grid? And will this accelerate high wealth income users disconnecting from the grid? So this might be a Rodrick / James question.
Yeah, so I'll start that. So that has been proposed. It's not yet been approved. So it is tied to the PREPA, which is our energy utility, to the RSA, which is currently under evaluation from a judge. So it's unclear whether or not that's going to move forward at this point. So we're anxiously watching and waiting to see whether that happens. But that definitely will have an impact on the kinds of decisions that are made. And so we'll see what happens coming out of the restructuring agreement with the fiscal board and PREPA to figure out what the path forward. But and to be clear, it's not a tax on solar, but there are additional fees that they're looking at, and there is a real question around whether or not those fees disincentivize further investment in moving towards renewable for both for private companies as well as individuals.
Michael, could you repeat the second part? Because I'm not aware of the current affairs in Puerto Rico, but I know the second part was broader.
Right. Is there any good data or reports on the resilience of solar and its ability to withstand hurricanes and winds? I'm actually going to broaden this question a little bit. So because solar only makes up actually a small percentage compared to like wind energy. So and hydro, et cetera. So when it comes to renewables, and maybe more specifically solar, does it withstand hurricanes and wind? Is that proven in the Caribbean? Please tell us.
Yeah, but I mean, there are other forms, of course, of renewables. But when we're talking about the Caribbean, I mean, solar is the most prominent one that gets a lot of the attention. I was just looking, yeah. So the Rocky Mountain Institute. I'm going to share this in the chat. The Rocky Mountain Institute, which is Colorado-based NGO, but they've done a ton in Puerto Rico and advising PREPA and all and around the Caribbean. They put together this paper called "Solar Under Storm: Solar Best Practices for Resilient Photovoltaic Systems for Small Island Developing States." So I'd suggest that would be a great place to start if you really want the details. But to summarize, yeah, solar does well under hurricanes. I mean, as you know, nothing is going to withstand the eye of a very strong hurricane, right? I mean, you could say don't build anything in the Caribbean if you want zero, if you don't want to take on any risk. But well-engineered solar does very well under strong winds. So it's about the engineering. It's about making sure that you have building codes and practices. One issue that has happened in some islands is that dodgy installers who were not following the practices that you need in the region have made a bad name for solar by putting installations in which were not which did not, but that's down to bad engineering. Of course, yeah, solar is not completely immune, but there is that it can be well engineered. So yeah, I think that policy paper is worth taking a look at.
Awesome. Let me further speak to that question with some personal experience. So I visited a handful of farms here in Puerto Rico and other types of households that have some degree of solar set up either on their rooftops or out in their field. And in some cases, they've created systems that they can easily pack up and put inside a shed or inside their concrete house temporarily to shield it from hurricane impacts. Other ones have them built in such a way and engineered in such a way, as James was speaking to, that they actually can withstand most hurricane impacts in the first place. So they don't need to be moved around or removed. Supposedly, me personally, I'd probably make one that I can, pack away for 24 hours and then put back out. But I have seen those systems out there, so there is definitely some risk reduction depending on how you build out that system.
Those systems, there are some systems that are very photogenic that you can kind of unroll them out the back of a truck, for example. They're great for disaster response if you need solar all of a sudden to provide energy. But in terms of the economics of having something that is there all year round, it does make more sense to have a permanent installation. You can run the figures and run the risk, and obviously work with the insurance companies, because there is no zero risk installation. But there's a lot of interesting work that has been put into it to making sure that they can withstand high winds.
Awesome, thank you, James. Let me get to I think this is our last question. I think the rest are comments. So, and I know you've got to run pretty quick here, James. So let me throw this out there real quick, and we can wrap up. At least this portion. Again, we're going to have Fusion Farms on right after this to just discuss their business model for AgTech and renewables integrated with that business system out of Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. All right, so our next question is from Brandon Bateman. Hey, Brandon, friend of mine, awesome guy. I am seeing a sea of tin roof construction throughout Puerto Rico. Housing is a top infrastructural cost, and as such will dramatically affect the bottom line of any output analysis. A lot of big words there, Brandon. Inextricable links between resilience and housing in Puerto Rico context. The annual hurricane season defeats broad stability for the local labor force. Okay, how can alternative design, Brandon, you might have to rehash your question here. Let me, if the other panelists, if you want to actually look at it, just get into your chat and scroll up a little bit. Annual hurricane season defeats broad stability for the local labor force. How can alternative design for residential class builders connect and coordinate with funding and on the ground communities in need of resilient housing? I'm assuming this is also like, how do we integrate renewables into housing costs and building moving forward, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm going to have to jump in 1 minute, but I'll just take a quick stab at it to say I think you would probably need a PhD to give it full justice as a question. But if I understand correctly, it's about kind of the need for resilient housing and the need for houses to be able to withstand there. Obviously, there's a huge amount of components. Part of this is building codes. Part of this is the materials going into housing, and making sure that those building codes are actually enforced. So yeah, I'm gonna have to jump off now, Michael, but thank you to you and thank you to everyone else. Been very interesting.
All right. Thank you, James. Let me see if we have any other questions for our other panelists. Again, thank you, James. To have it properly signed. Okay, quick comment here from Humberto Roman. Please do not promote people to take out their photovoltaic system, their solar energy system. It is not that easy. It is better to have it properly designed. So that's some good insight from Humberto Roman, I believe is here locally based in Puerto Rico. So yes, whatever I said about trying to move it in and out of the house, don't listen to me. All right, let's see here. Thank you, Humberto. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up, and we'll go ahead and bring Fusion Farms on. Again, panelists who need to go, please, you're welcome to after this, and otherwise attendees, if you'd like to hear from a locally based new business that has been establishing itself since Hurricane Maria to discuss their business model, then please do. Yara and Rodrick, thank you so much for being here. Do you have any final thoughts to share any shameless plugs that you'd like to put out?
I'll start. I'll just say, you know, our mission is simple. It's our job to help companies make investments in Puerto Rico, and that's what we're doggedly determined to do. And so, if you're looking at making an investment in Puerto Rico, feel free to reach out to us at Invest Puerto Rico. Our email, our website is www.investpr.org. That's www.investpr.org. We have a full team that's here to provide you with service. And I did see one question that came and said, how are you guys planning on maintaining conversation with investors following the election? I saw that question come on the screen. And I'll just say, you know, we were created specifically for the purpose of providing continuity as it relates to economic development support, and to try to pull as much as possible out of the political and governmental process as it relates to new investors coming to the island. So we've got a CRM system, and we've got deep relationships. So we're going to just continuing to work those relationships and ensure that we have the pieces in place to move things forward in a positive manner. The last point I'll mention is that Act 60 did recently pass, which Act 60 aims to kind of combine and synthesize all of the incentives that Puerto Rico has in a much more cohesive fashion. One can find out more about Act 60 and the other incentives available in Puerto Rico on our website under the incentive section. Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Excellent. Let me write on what Rodrick was just saying. So one of the ways I like to describe, one of the ways that I like to describe Puerto Rico is that it's what we call a dynamic policy environment and a dynamic business environment. So there's pros and cons to all of that, but generally speaking, and this is my own shameless plug, you probably need a couple of consultants or an organization like Invest Puerto Rico to help you navigate that policy environment here. No matter what your investment is, no matter what your interest in doing business on the island is, whether you're local talent, whether you're outside talent, there are good experts here on the ground that can do everything from project management to, again, navigating that policy environment for you, as Rodrick was alluding to in what he was saying. So Yara.
I mean, yeah, I'll just say, you know, when you reach out to Rodrick about the investment and Michael about, you know, going through policy, you can reach out to us if you want to plan that farm as well. No, but honestly, I think, again, there's a really big opportunity here on the island and for CEA, I think, and you know, kind of moving more into kind of self-sustainability. And I would be happy to be a part of helping that happen if you guys have any projects. Again, I put my email in the chat, I'll put it again. And yeah, very humble to be speaking alongside all of you as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Yara. So once again, the organizations that have been represented here today are, I'm not really an organization, but I'm Michael Scadden, a Latin American Caribbean business strategist living here in Puerto Rico, and working with a variety of organizations and focusing as much of my time and effort as possible on things like risk reduction and business strategy, but with a focus on social impact. My favorite spaces to be in are AgTech and Renewables, which is one of the reasons I brought all these folks together today. I also handle the Latin American Intersections podcast that you can find on pretty much anything, including Spotify. It's a raw podcast. It's basically just my own interviews with incredible business leaders and folks like you've seen here today as an extension of my work. The other organizations that we have here today, again, are Agritecture, represented by Yara Nagi, Invest Puerto Rico, represented by Rodrick Miller, and James had to hop off, but James Ellsmoor of Island Innovation and Solar Head of State. Very interesting work that everybody does. Please do visit their sites. They publish a lot of great documents on these spaces, and a lot of that speaks to the investability of the kinds of assets that you're going to find in renewables and AgTech. All right, so without further ado, oh, and one last thing. So on social media and here, we are going to go ahead and plug in everybody's contact info, their organizational contact info, websites, etc. Okay, and hopefully between our organizations, we'll have some more collaborations and also be able to push the right people in everybody's general direction as seems fit. So without further ado, let us hear from Fusion Farms, a controlled environment agriculture business based in Puerto Rico, based in Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. As I mentioned earlier, addressing someone's question about you know, whether or not there were Puerto Ricans on this panel. Again, this is the introduction, and we are planning several more panels going into the future where we really drill down into the local talent, local entrepreneurship, and anyone that has had any amount of success in these spaces, right? But in many ways, AgTech and specifically vertical agriculture is one of those that's kind of like new territory here in Puerto Rico. We have lots of great examples from many cities across the world. And of course, when it comes to Fusion Farms, Kendall and Lisa are also transplants to the island, fell in love, came here like Rodrick, like myself, like many other folks, and but have been able to create what we believe will be a sustainable business model moving forward in the controlled environment agriculture space. And again, to address that, we are bringing in talent and entrepreneurs within the same space from across the island to have a local specific discussion in future panels, inviting investment from the outside world to Puerto Rico and helping everyone understand why it is a good investment here and how we can, and making sure that we're helping communities along the way. All right, so without further ado, Fusion Farms, Kendall and Lisa, please introduce yourselves, introduce your organization, and then just go right into everything you can about your business model in the next like 20 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. My name is Kendall Lang, and this is my wife, Lisa, and we are the co-founders of Fusion Farms. We are a hurricane-protected indoor vertical aquaponics farm operating in a controlled environment facility in Mayaguez. And we are excited to be sharing, and Michael, thank you for the invitation to share our story. We love the opportunity to share what is possible in Puerto Rico. Definitely want to give a shout out to Rodrick because he's got a fantastic team behind him. He's great at what he does, and if you have any questions about investing in PR, he's a great resource, and he's got a lot of great people on his team that can help you answer the questions that might come up. So we are kind of a poster child for the story of how do you invest in PR, what do you do in PR, and I want to give you a little bit of background on why we're here. And so the problem that we are trying to help solve is food security and food sovereignty in Puerto Rico. Food security was really brought to a head with the COVID-19 and the fragility of the global ag supply chain, and really what it means to have hyper-local food sources where you're not dependent upon outside resources shipping produce to survive on. And so if you look around the globe, if you look at New Zealand as an example, another island nation, right? It's a little bit larger population than Puerto Rico, but it has complete food security, food sovereignty. It does not require any imports to feed its people. So that, I believe, is possible for Puerto Rico, and that's why we're here, is to demonstrate a model of a controlled environment facility that is an ecosystem that combines just about everything that you've been talking about across these panelists. So what I want to do is describe briefly a couple of things that we're doing here, give you some high-level numbers in terms of the investment, because it is costly, and I do want to talk about the return on investment because there is proven returns that we can talk about. I'll talk about a little bit of the challenges. My wife will talk about the nonprofit portion that we're looking at in terms of education, community involvement, our partnerships with universities and nonprofits. So to the basic numbers, the problem that we're solving, as we've said, is hurricane protected controlled environments. So when you look at what happened in Hurricane Maria, 80% of the traditional and greenhouse farms on the island were wiped out. They were gone. catastrophic demolition of the farm and agricultural supply on the island here. Now, since that time, which is almost 3 years ago now, you've only had 34% of those farms be reestablished or renovated or restored. So there is a huge challenge in terms of the mentality of why would you reinvest in agriculture when you have hurricane season and when you're sitting in the middle of Hurricane Alley. How can you develop a solution that can prevent the kind of catastrophic loss? And so that's what we're proposing here, is the internal use of assets that exist on the island. And that's part of what we've done with InvestPR and with the government of Puerto Rico through PRIDCO, which is the Puerto Rico Industrial Development Company. We have leased a facility in Mayaguez, which is part of a multi-100,000 square foot industrial park. And we have taken an abandoned vacant warehouse and converted it into a controlled environment facility. And that is with a proof of concept to be able to demonstrate, number one, you can do it. Number two, you can operate it feasibly. Number three, there is a market for it, and that we'll talk about some of the numbers. But what we are operating in is an 11,500 square foot facility, which is in a concrete warehouse. And we have basically enclosed and created a gas-tight, airtight facility inside that building so that we can completely control the temperature, the humidity, the nitrogen, the CO2, so that we can create an environment that's just not possible outdoors. Now, there's plenty of things here that were talked about in the panel by the panelists that you can do root vegetables very easily, and they would withstand the majority of the kind of tropical storms and so forth. But just a couple weeks ago, we had Tropical Storm Laura that came through. And here in Mayaguez, just in Mayaguez, there was $3 million worth of agricultural damage. And we were operating the day of and the day after that storm, continuing uninterrupted to do what we're doing. And we're growing, as Lisa will allude to, some very damageable leafy greens that are easily bruised and easily affected by the environment. So we're doing, lettuces and basil and herbs and a whole variety of produce that would have been wiped out in this tropical storm, but because we're in a controlled environment, it was protected. Now, we're doing an aquaponic facility because we look at not just the nutrition component of hyper-local fresh leafy greens, but we're also providing a protein source. So the tilapia is the fish of choice right now. We are looking at other types of fish down the road, but we currently have tilapia in the system. It is a closed loop system where we are emulating what happens in nature. So any riverbed, any lake, any pond, we're emulating indoors what you would see in that natural ecosystem. So we have the nitrification process going on where the fish are the nutrient engine for the system, much like chicken manure or cow manure or other nutrients in a traditional farm are the nutrient engine or the fertilizer engine for traditional farming. Fish are, for us, that nutrient engine in our water farming system, because we are predominantly water farmers. We don't use soil. We are completely in a deep water culture system, using the fish nutrients as the energy to drive the plant growth. Now, because we're in a controlled environment, we get up to, in some cases, more than 12 cycles per year. So we can harvest, compared to traditional land farmers that collect 2, maybe 3 cycles in any given year, we're producing every month on a consistent basis. And that's part of the feasibility, because we can do higher density of plants, and we have the vertical density as well as the horizontal density, and we can produce month after month after month. We can do things like carousel scheduling that a traditional farmer just can't do for very sophisticated buyers like Costco or Sam's Club or Econo or the major distributors who are supplying the grocery stores. Customers don't wait once a year to buy tomatoes. Okay, customers want to buy tomatoes on a weekly basis. So our ability to demonstrate a consistent, high quality produce on a week in, week out basis is part of the model that we're proving out here at scale. So we are focused on a scalable, commercially feasible aquaponics vertical farm because there are lots and lots of vacant, abandoned buildings across the island. Now, as part of our learning exercise here, we have developed certain partnerships that I'm going to let Lisa talk about now in terms of universities and others.
Yeah, again, thanks, Mike, for having us on. Really appreciate it. One of the things, it's really difficult to kind of explain this. Just want to let you know that we do give tours on Saturdays because it's not the same hearing about it as to actually see what we're doing here with the fish, with the 5 levels, and having a plant capacity of 39,000 plants in one building is pretty amazing. The thing that I really want to focus on, because I think this is really our passion and why we came here. We came here with a partnership with the University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez. They have an amazing agriculture department there. They educate these young kids to come out with these incredible degrees. And unfortunately, because of the economy and other reasons, they have to leave and go to the States to grow strawberries in Florida or corn in Nebraska or wherever. And we're really trying to promote a way for them to stay here, to teach them a different kind of farming so that they can, in complement to the traditional farming here. So our education foundation is all about these kids that are coming out of college and really making sure, number one, that we provide internships that will become, and they're paid internships, as well as well-paying jobs so that these kids can stay here on the island in the culture that they love, with the families that they love and the friends that they love. And in all of this, they don't want to leave. So we want to provide really good paying jobs, number one. The second thing with our education foundation is to make sure that we provide an opportunity for the entire community and beyond to experience how they can actually implement some of these things in their own homes. So we want to teach people. We have an initiative called the Edible Fence Initiative as an example, and we give out seeds. We provide training for how to create an edible fence in your community. We have a fence at our farm that has Malabar spinach and parcha and cucumber and cucamelons and all different things on the fence where the community can come and eat from the fence. Instead of weeds or just bare chain link fences, we want to create edible fences all over the island. No one here should ever go hungry or be without food. So those are some of the initiatives that we have, but we're super excited. We've already hired 3 students from the university, which we're pretty excited about. And we put a job, just as an example, we put a job up on our job board and we got 119 job applications in 4 hours. That tells you there's interest on the island. It's just a matter of providing a place for them to come to work.
So a couple of things, Michael. I want to take time for questions and answers, but let me give you some numbers and some statistics on what we're doing. And I did see a question come across about the water. So our building is 11,500 square feet. We have a rainwater collection system on one half of the building. We also are going to have a complete solar system on the building that will have 700 panels when it's all done. So that will be a permanent installation because I'm not interested in taking individual solar panels off during a storm. And the good news is the engineering, as was alluded to, is very capable of withstanding 150 mile an hour and greater storms. So our solar system is actually going to be rated to 175 mile an hour winds. Now, somebody will definitely come on and say, hey, at the top of the weather station in Puerto Rico, at the height of Hurricane Maria, the weather station that was tracking this, at its top speed before it broke, calculated 250 mile an hour winds. So there's always going to be challenges with solar that, you know, if you have a telephone pole that is ejected and cut loose and lands in the middle of your solar panels, you're going to have damage. So there is nothing you can do to say you're completely protected. You can't say you're hurricane proof, but you can say, you know, that you're hurricane protected in a lot of cases. So the majority of well-engineered systems will survive. The building that we're in has survived since 1961. So we know that it's not going anywhere. It survived all the earthquakes. So we are very resilient in that regard. So in the 11,500 square feet, it's taken us about $230 a square foot to complete this total project. So that represents about a $2.5 million investment. And as Lisa alluded to, we have a 39,000 plant capacity system, and we're focusing primarily on two main crops, basil and mint. I'd be happy to share why those are important crops, because they have multiple uses, but we're generating about $12 a pound, and that's a wholesale price because we intend to sell wholesale to distributors only. We have a couple of major distributor relationships that we're selling that. So there is substantial financial opportunity in this space, and we're showing about a 26 to 28% return on investment for the yield that we're showing on the crops that we're generating and the margins that we're generating. So there is a financial feasibility aspect to this that has to make sense. So yes, we're here to do well by doing good, and there's, you know, clearly a path that we're trying to prove that the financial institutions can and should be loaning to vertical farms. When we came here 2 years ago, Puerto Rico Farm Credit Bureau would not lend to us because they didn't have any baseline of lending criteria or risk evaluation or credit assessment of vertical farms. There are none on the island. We're first of a kind. Indoor. So from that standpoint, PR Farm Credit lends to all kinds of farmers on the island, but they couldn't even lend to us because they didn't have any baseline. Now they do. Now they're in a position to lend because of what we've done here. So go ahead, Michael.
No, those numbers are going to be really helpful in terms of bringing, you know, more financing to the sector. But let me take it to an equity investor perspective, right? Let's say that I guess right away, do you already have your projections for the next 2 years out after you finish the build that you're currently working on?
We do. So we've completed this round, and we have two options of buildings 2 and 3 that are behind us. So the next building is actually 48,000 square feet, and we'll actually be able to make a path and run a go-kart between the two buildings. The same thing with building number 3, which is 72,000 square feet. So in this 3-building complex, we will have about 130,000 square feet total. And the build out for the next phase is about 25 million roughly for those 2 buildings. So, and with the expansion of all of these facilities, we want to have at least 10 facilities all over the island. That means a lot of equity. So we are constantly going to be on the hunt for impact partners, impact investors to help us fund the capital requirements up front to do this. Now we're actually exploring a capital structure that will include a fund that can fund not only us, but other farms that qualify under the same criteria. So we're excited about bringing the attention of the financial players who want to invest in this sector, but don't have the acumen or the experience to assess. That's part of what we're going to help do, is create the expertise, because on our board we have Dr. Michael McGee of Caribe Fisheries here in Lajas, who studied with Dr. James Ricosi, who's like the godfather of aquaponics. So he did the most detailed, extensive scientific research on aquaponics farming out of the British Virgin Islands. So we have Murray Hallam, who is out of Australia, on our board. And so we have a very talented group of world-class experts who are familiar with and doing aquaponics facilities all over the world as part of our board to be able to help us help others create the capital sources necessary to do these kind of facilities, because it is capital intensive, but we can demonstrate the financial feasibility of that through the models that we've created and help others get access to the capital necessary to do this. So when you think about the average age of a farmer in Puerto Rico is over 60 years old. We have to engage our young people, and we have to give them the financial resources to be able to build these kind of facilities. So that's part of our mission as well.
And I'd like to jump in real quick. We have a question from Michael Blacker, and I will answer 1.5 parts of it. Yes, it is a vertical farm. We're 5 levels deep water culture. So that's why in only 11,500 square feet, we've got a plant capacity for 39,000 plants because it's 5 levels high. And I know that you said, Michael, that you would like to come for a tour. We'd love to have you. You can see it in person, but also a little bit about the water. We talk a lot about solar, but water here is absolutely critical. We chose this location because Mayaguez is very, very predictable, very dependable when it comes to rainwater. And with the number of gallons that we need for our system, we absolutely have to have rainwater collection on the roof. So Kendall can speak to the numbers on that and what we're doing currently. On our roof, we only have half of the roof right now for rainwater collection, and I'll let him kind of talk about the filtration system.
So currently, every inch of rain on half of the building that we have doing rainwater collection, we get 3,300 gallons. So the recent tropical storm Laura that came through, we had 2 inches in 1 hour. So that's 6,600 gallons in 1 hour of rainwater collection. Now, we currently don't have the cistern capacity to capture all of that. So unfortunately, a good portion of that is going right back into the runoff system. So we're actually dealing with and trying to come up with solutions of how do we provide that excess rainwater to the community. So from our standpoint, the objective of our facility is to be a zero waste facility so that we will be processing everything that we use on the facility will be renewable, reusable, compostable, and completely zero waste facility. So there was also a question of how are we handling gray water? And so from that standpoint, it's part of the total ecosystem that we're building here so that we're running not only renewable energies, but also the waste becomes zero waste. So whether it's plastic that we want to get rid of, so we're using compostable clamshells to present our products on the customer side, to having compost machine and having our own fish food growing on the farm because we're growing moringa trees where we're harvesting the moringa, powderizing the moringa, using a local Puerto Rican supplier to add that ingredient into a fish food to stop using fish meal in fish food. I mean, one of the craziest things in the aquaponics, aquaculture, pet aquarium business is that the food that you feed your fish is primarily protein sourced through fish meal. So you have commercial fishermen going out and harvesting fish from the ocean that's turned into fish meal and put back into fish food to feed, fish in captivity. And it's nuts. It's not sustainable. So part of what we're trying to accomplish is sustainability in every aspect. So we have a partnership with the National Renewable Energy Labs out of Colorado, which is coming in to help us with a comprehensive power supply solution that includes not only solar, not only wind, but also hydropower, because out of this rainwater, we're generating tremendous energy through the vertical gravity, just the natural power of gravity to create many hydropower stations. And because we're producing this very clean, organic, quality root waste, we're creating essentially an organic food supply that will be part of our anaerobic digestive biomethanation facilities. So I'd love to talk about some of these things in more detail, but digesters are a huge source of energy that we will produce methane, and then we will scrub that to create CO2 that we need in the facility for the plants, and a natural gas supply that we can then burn for our own energy production sources.
And I'd like to add one more thing about the gray water. I don't know if you mentioned this, but we are a closed loop system, which is very different than a hydroponic. farm. A hydroponic farm is not a closed loop system. So we aren't dumping gray water like a typical vertical farm would be. And the only time we ever lose water is through evaporation, transpiration from the plants. So we have to top off, I don't know, not very much, that's for sure. So we do collect that water and we run it through a filter, but we're not dumping water off. Everything that's in this building pretty much stays in this building. The only time we dump anything off is from our swirl filter. When we have our swirl filter, we take what's out of the bottom of the tank and we drain that off, and that's really high nutrient value, and we take that and we water our moringa trees, which are what we're growing for the fish food. So there's nothing bad that we're dumping into the ground, and that's why the closed loop system of an aquaponics is so much better for the environment as well. So we appreciate that question.
This is amazing how comprehensive this is. I mean, when you're talking about anything that has to do with circular economy, your farm basically includes all of that, or is going to over the next couple of years. And it sounds like a very healthy return on investment when we want to talk about the bottom line, besides the inclusiveness of your operation. Before we wrap up, is Yara still on? Yara, Agritecture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to bring you to the floor for a second. If you have anything that you wanted to comment on or discuss here with Kendall and Lisa real quick, considering the spaces that you're in.
Yeah, well, I've been truthfully back and forth, but I wanted to kind of hear as much as I could. It sounds like just a great model with a lot of, potential for the area. I think we're going to talk a little bit more afterwards. I saw that you guys reached out already. No, but yeah, I think definitely the fact that, we've been able to see success through models like these, this is kind of really key, because piloting farms is probably your other kind of first step when thinking about investing in CEA in an area. You never want to go too big too fast. So yeah, being able to trial that in the area, seeing success there and growing further and further, I think that's the way to do it. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of see where the business goes. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Yara.
Good. Thanks, Yara. And Michael, I did want to add one final thing too, is that we are proving out the concept. Go ahead.
Wait, before you add the final thing, and then we can close out. One of the questions that sometimes comes up is, are you going to have competitive advantage over outdoor farmers, or is there a comparative advantage and room for collaborations between what you're doing? And I know that maybe you touched on this briefly, but can you speak to that a little bit? Because I know that one of the concerns, especially because so many farmers here in Puerto Rico are small farmers, right? So, is there space for collaboration? Is it part of a larger food security system island-wide? And what are the comparative advantages that you can speak to on that? So go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to just start out by saying, one of the things that's really important to us is to support traditional farmers any way we can. I think our focus is on anything that has an easily damaged surface. That's something that's going to be wiped out in a storm of any kind. We want to really protect the tender greens, if you will. So we're not competitive in that way. We're not going to be growing the same things during the same seasons necessarily. But in addition to that, I think our focus is going to be on the larger scale, because there are so many wonderful boutique organic farmers around the island. They're doing wonderful farmers markets. We really want to support that in any way that we can. We're part of a co-op as well. So we want to collaborate by doing a lot of different things. One of the things we think we can bring to the table is the supply chain for actually building out these systems. It is very, very, very difficult for a small farmer to order what they need from wherever they need it to create their farm. And I think if we can collaborate on that, on the supplies, on the food, for if it's fish food, I know a lot of hydroponics farmers are using nutrients, that kind of thing. We don't do that, but certainly those are things that I think if farmers get together and buy in bulk, they're going to be so much better off. And the feasibility study goes through the roof when you can buy in quantity. And because our facility is so big, we're able to buy things at a much lower cost. And we want to be able to pass that along to other farmers. In addition, we want to be able to supply seed when and if necessary and requested. I mean, we give seeds out a lot and sell seeds at our cost to farmers that are looking for specific seeds to have them.
Excellent point. So go ahead. What's your final set of thoughts?
Well, I was just going to add to this that we are currently selling. We have 42 restaurant clients on the west side. We have 2 distributors that we're currently distributing through. We have a letter of intent with a new distributor. So we have basically pre-sold 30,000 pounds a month of produce. So we know the demand is here, and we know that more is required. We've talked about monocropping in each specific building because each crop has unique characteristics and challenges. So one of the crops that we're really, really excited about, and we'll share some hope and excitement about what's coming for Puerto Rico, we have an entire grow trough dedicated to berry patch strawberries. And if you have ever tried to get strawberries in Puerto Rico, it is definitely a challenge, but we would love to give you a tour, show you our facilities, show you the grow trough with strawberry plants with strawberries on it. And if you follow us on Facebook or check us out on Instagram, you'll see some of these pictures, and we'd love to share that with you. And again, we invite anybody here to reach out to us via email. Our website is fusionfarms.ag for .ag. And we'd love to invite you to come see what we're doing because it's definitely a first of a kind in Puerto Rico.
And I have one question for you, Michael. What did you think of your tour?
It was tasty. Yes. Everybody, I'd been spending some time trying to figure out where Fusion Farms was. I had seen it pop up on my radar a couple of times. So going back a couple of years, when I first came to the island, I was discussing with a few folks the possibility of setting up a whole series of food security / CEA businesses on the island, right? That have, whether it's public-private partnerships or local distribution, et cetera, right? And lo and behold, there's this great example right in Mayaguez. So I ran down there to Fusion Farms and just showed up at their door, and Kendall and Lisa gave me the best tour ever. It blew my mind what they've been able to do with their aquaponics system in when it comes to vertical agriculture in general. And of course, the whole way, Lisa was just putting all of these bits of greens in my hands. It was like I had a full salad dinner that day, or full lunch, whatever time I happened to be there. And yes, it was delicious. They do again. Thank you for that, Lisa and Kendall. We are planning on doing some more outreach, getting some videos of what you guys having going on. It's very exciting to see their build out. Anyone here on the island or happens to be visiting, please do take a Saturday morning to go visit them on your guided tours. Go ahead and announce that one more time for us.
Yeah, so we have 2 different tours. It's at the same time, actually. And all of our proceeds go to the Education Foundation. So they start 10:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. And the first tour, it's about an hour and a half tour. Without a salad is $10. With a salad is $15. We have not had one person yet take a tour without a salad. I think that's what they're here for. So we love to just show off our space, and right now we have built out about 2,000 square feet of the 11,500, and at some point when it's biosecure, these tours are going to end. So if you're at all interested in coming in and seeing it, this is the time to do it, because once we get built out, It's not gonna, you're gonna be able to look through the window and that's about it. So those are the tours. The only thing we require on the tour is closed-toed shoes, a mask, and sunglasses for the LED lights.
Excellent. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap it up if there's no more questions from the audience. Besides the invites to explore what everyone that has been on this panel has built and is building, I'm also putting a shout out to everybody who wants to pass through the island, take a look at all these things, and also go paddleboarding, which is what I'm going to do right after this. Puerto Rico, it has lots of fun in the sun. So besides a great place with lots of incentives for doing business, you can spend a good deal of your day working and the rest of it absolutely playing out in the waves, up in the mountains. And I mean, I can't think of a better way to get involved with the place. So anything else, guys? Are we good?
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Michael.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, Lisa. See you soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up just by saying, I mean, there is a lot of opportunity here in Puerto Rico and throughout the rest of the Caribbean within these specific sectors, within AgTech and within renewables. And we are talking about things that not long ago didn't seem to have the most respectable return on investments. Now they do. I think that the risks and concerns of the past are quickly being mitigated if they haven't already been mitigated. And when we are talking about investments in sustainability, we're not just talking about feel-good, environmentally friendly projects. We're talking about the sustainability of the assets in your portfolio. So whether it's an equity investment in a new agro entrepreneur that might be starting one of these small farms, or a community renewable energy center, there's a lot to consider and a lot to offer here here in Puerto Rico, and of course the rest of the islands that share the Caribbean with us. Without anything else at this point, I do invite everybody to attend our future conferences and panels, which, like I said, we are planning on bringing a lot of local talent to the forefront to discuss everything, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that they faced and have been able to mitigate here on the island. So do keep a lookout on our social media. And that includes the Latin America Intersection podcast, as well as the organizations that the other panelists are involved with. Again, Agritecture, Island Innovation, Solar Out of State, Invest Puerto Rico, and again, Latin American Intersections, and our last but not least, Fusion Farms based in Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. Thank you for tuning in, and everybody.